It's a really busy night of all things people, power, and politics. Welcome, my friends, to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This, as you know, is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. The big story tonight, the State of the State address. And we're unpacking what the governor said, the GOP response from a very prominent Republican, and some other reaction to it tonight. We're also diving into the state of the race for Detroit mayor. It's heating up already as the sprint to November rolls on. And in some cases, it's getting pretty bitter. We'll tell you about that. Malachi Barrett and Sam Robinson, two popular journalists in town, they'll be weighing in. And the stage is set for massive layoffs in the federal government. A new memo sent to federal agencies. What's in it? And the reaction we're hearing tonight. But we begin at the state capitol, where Governor Gretchen Whitmer delivered her State of the State address. She started out by recognizing former Senator Debbie Stabenow and saying Constitution Hall, which houses the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, Whitmer vowed she'd work for common ground with President Trump and a divided legislature, but then made this part really clear.
Now, I'm not looking for fights, but I won't back down from them either. In Michigan, we have an opportunity and an obligation to lead by example. Our state represents America in every way, economically, geographically, politically, and socially. People from every walk of life call Michigan home. We don't always agree, but we move forward together. That is the source of our strength. Let's show the rest of the country how to get things done.
She went on to say the state of the state is strong and said the priorities for the state should be lowering costs, creating more jobs, and making the government work for all of us. The governor then brought up the president's tariffs, saying she's glad they're paused for now because the consequences for Michigan could be catastrophic.
Grateful that Republicans, Democrats, and private sector leaders are speaking out against widespread 25% tariffs on our neighbors, because we know that saying no to Canada would mean saying yes to China. I'm also grateful that the president decided to pause. As I've said before, I'm not opposed to tariffs outright, but they are a blunt tool when the Michigan economy is on the line. 25% tariffs on everything would slow down construction, shutter small businesses, lead to layoffs in the auto industry, and cost Michigan families an extra $1,200 a year at the store and at the pump, because companies will pass their higher costs on to the consumer.
Now, the governor also touched on one of the biggest issues she ran on back in 2018, fixing, as she said, the damn roads. Whitmer talked about the fact the Rebuilding Michigan bond plan is about to expire and called on the legislature to work together to find a long-term solution and get the job done.
To get it right, we all have to recognize some hard truths. To my friends in the GOP, a long-term fix means new, fair sources of revenue. We can't cut our way to better roads by slashing public safety, health, or schools. To my fellow Democrats, cuts will need to be a part of the solution. All right, some claps over here. I mean, to the business community, we can't put this on the backs of the middle class. For all of us, to be a part of the solution, we must all compromise, and that's the way it ought to be.
A lot to unpack from that speech, and we have an all-star panel to weigh in right here in Studio C. It's the Perry and Sherry Show, two people who are on opposite ends of the political spectrum, but they can teach the world a thing or two about something called decency. I don't know if anyone on social media has heard about that yet, but you should look into it. It's very nice. You can actually disagree with people and still not be disagreeable. Perry and Sherry, good to see you both. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. We ate pizza together.
We did. I got to tell you, we have a lot of people chiming in today, and I'll tell you, some of them have some very strong things to say about this governor and her speech. I want to get through a couple of those over here. Look, I know the print is small, but basically you have Elena, who is chiming in saying her speech was a clear pivot to the center and to kitchen table issues in the midst of the Trump administration chaos, as she calls it. Tariffs would devastate Michigan, so she has to be strategic in her messaging. Diane, thank you for writing in. You say she's a joke. We don't need her. Why are the damn roads still a mess? Chris says she didn't say anything about the water costs. We're the Great Lakes state with the highest water around. And look at the one on the top left of your screen. That's from the Transit Riders Union. This is interesting. At Detroit Transit, saying, I appreciate her spotlighting that to fix the damn roads long term will require both new revenues and careful cuts. I wish she had mentioned that her MI Road Ahead plan also includes investment in public transit to provide essential rides for seniors, students, and others. And by the way, the last one, couldn't tell you, watching our Spartans play Maryland in hoops, go green. I agree with you there, all politics aside. All right, Perry, where do you agree and where do you disagree with what the governor said here tonight?
Well, I love the fact that she is now going to look at all of the detail in the bills. Notice how whenever you have an addition to the bill, you have to claim that there is transparency because you're going to put the name of the person who wants that add-on, and that pork has killed us. I love the fact that she's going to put in with the Republicans to save suffrage. Very important, right?
I thought that was fascinating because there was a part where she said that she sat down this past weekend, Sherry, at the White House when at the president's invitation, and she said, I had a chance to talk to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth about the fighter mission at Selfridge. This sounds like a woman who says, let's mend this broken relationship between Trump and Whitmer, wouldn't you say?
This sounds like a woman who wants to be 48. You know, basically we saw tonight her, as one of your writers said, pivot to a space where she can now become more presidential. There's no fight. There's no resistance to what some of the things that Donald Trump has been spewing and the attacks that have been going forth across this country. All of the lawsuits that are in the Supreme Court with what we're dealing with, there was no mention of any of that. So this is more a more dialed back, centered presidential candidate getting ready to yield to both sides or appeal to both sides.
In the same sense, you could argue that this president has decided to put the past behind him and move forward with this governor, even reappointing her to the Council of Governors and seated very closely to the president at the White House. Perry, what did you make of that?
Well, I've always believed that Trump has very thick skin. It doesn't matter. He's gotten beaten up unmercifully, and he's the most resilient person, and he wants what's best for this country. So he always forgives. Look at the people he ends up putting in his cabinet. These can be people that run against him. It doesn't matter. People he had in his administration before. He always tries to do what is best for the country.
But when Governor Whitmer does well, does President Trump do well? Do you think this is an opportunity for this president to work with Governor Whitmer and then take credit for success that's happened in this state?
Well, he loves Michigan. He wants us to do very well. And I know for a fact. He loves Michigan. I was in Washington today. They were talking about how important Michigan is. It's literally one of the most important states. Right now, it is earmarked as maybe the most important state in the union.
Fox 2 had the chance to talk to Bill Ford Jr. during the Detroit Auto Show, and he said he received a call from President Trump at that time, a few months back, asking what his thoughts were on the tariffs. The tariffs are on hold for now. Sherry, how much would those tariffs, in your mind, help or hurt Michigan if they were put into effect on Mexico and Canada?
Yeah, we have the big three. I mean, you know, we have hundreds of thousands of workers that are working, GM, Ford, Stellantis. I mean, that's what would be problematic. I mean, Sean Fain made it clear that we have to stand up for our working families and working people at our Michigan Democratic Party convention this past Saturday. So that's where the focus has to be. And we know that the tariffs that will cause a loss of jobs because the increase on the cost of cars, it's going to slow production down. It's going to be a transfer to our consumers. And let's be clear. Donald Trump made it clear how he felt about Detroit. But I will say this. He's a narcissist, and so having his ego stroked, even if it's by Governor Whitmer, that will help calm the beast. So whatever it takes.
Let me ask you this. When it comes to tariffs, you heard the governor today say, and by the way, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell has said this on this program, that they are tools in the tool chest, and she is not opposed 100% to them. Do you think there's some common ground the Democrats and Republicans can find on tariffs, Perry?
Well, absolutely. We know that for a fact that one of the reasons, you go back 40, 50 years ago, that we had a problem in the auto industry is that whenever we were trying to ship our cars overseas, they had these enormous tariffs. Yet when they shipped them here, it was free. The bottom line is, when you take a look at the tariffs, they complained about these tariffs before. When the Biden administration took office, part of the campaign that they had was how horrible these tariffs were. Did they get rid of them? No, they kept them.
Let's talk about the situation in Gaza. All politics is local. We have so many Arab Americans who are watching this show right here in Metro Detroit, more than anywhere else in the country, and perhaps arguably outside of the Middle East, right here in Metro Detroit. Want to show you these tweets that, or these X posts and Truth Social posts from the president himself saying, hey, what's next for Gaza? And then there are these beautiful, gorgeous pictures of kind of an AI generated, here's what could be. And I think it's there that you see these folks having a great time. There's a statue, a gold statue of Donald Trump. When you see all of this, is this the chance for us to say, don't talk about what Donald Trump says, watch what he does? Or is this offensive? Sherry?
I think it's quite offensive, but he told us what he was going to do. I mean, nobody is going to be spared when Donald Trump is moving his agenda forward. It's all about him. I mean, a statue of himself? Come on now. So now we have to ask many of the folks who were uncommitted, was it worth it to be uncommitted? I want to hear some of them who were pushing uncommitted just as loud now, be just as loud now and pushing back on what they see Donald Trump doing.
You're friends with people of all cultures, your Arab American friends, your Palestinian American friends. If they see those pictures, not of this actual devastation, but of those AI generated, what this place could look like, is it offensive?
The bottom line is that we know things don't look very good there now. We know that we do not have peace there now. And there's absolutely no question that President Trump is doing everything in his power to see if he can't negotiate peace.
But building a resort there in his likeness,
Perry?
would that be the answer in your mind?
Don't you really think that he's just creating a situation where people are trying to see how wonderful life could be as opposed to having devastation?
A two-state solution is what the people have been calling for years. So now you're saying for him to put up a cartoon and show them what he believes in his mind is the best solution, it's reasonable?
It certainly has us talking about how things should be better.
And by the way, for all the folks who are going to sit back and on the keyboard warriors, slam out a tweet or a response to the show saying, well, you're just trying to point out things that he's doing in jest or what have you. If Joe Biden was to put out a social media post showing a gold statue of Joe Biden in Gaza, you better damn well believe we'd talk about it on the show. He's the president, and we're going to discuss what he says and what he thinks. Final question to you is about education. You're an educator, Sherry. This governor said we spend more than any other state, and we have some of the worst results. A real problem here, yes?
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. And while I served in the legislature as a former teacher, but always an educator, this is one of the things that baffled me on both sides of the aisle. We do patchwork policy on education. It's even worse now with term limits. And so you have to get people that are making laws that understand pedagogical competency, understand how to manage a classroom. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that oftentimes with those who are advancing laws.
Perry, we have about 30 seconds left. Your thoughts on the education issue that we face in Michigan?
Well, let's take a look at a fact. A fact is that under the Snyder administration, during a period of, what, 8 years, in that period, we had SAT scores that placed us anywhere from number 3 in the country to number 8 in the country. Now we're 41st in the country under Whitmer. That is a change in a relatively short period of time.
You're talking about college level readiness versus 3rd grade, 4th grade readers, and so we have a statewide problem with comprehension.
Two separate
issues you're talking about here, but I will say this governor has admitted that there is a problem here, and that's one that she needs to fix with the help, perhaps, of everybody around. Sherry and Perry, the Sherry and Perry Show. You see, they disagree, but they're not disagreeable. We're turning to the race for Detroit mayor now. A new candidate joins, and it's getting heated between 2 others. We're diving into the state of the race next. You're watching The Pulse right here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to dive into the race for Detroit Mayor Malachi Barrett with Bridge Detroit. Malachi, it's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us here today.
Pleasure to be here.
And if you're wondering where Sam Robinson is with Detroit 1 Million, he'll be joining us in just a second with his take on things. But Malachi, it's good to see you. Let's talk about the newest person to put their hat in the ring here, Reverend Solomon Kinloch. As soon as he put his hat in the ring, a ripple effect happened of those who were interested in perhaps diving in themselves. What happened there?
Yeah, I think it's been somewhat of a shockwave, or it's kind of shaken up a race that I think a lot of folks, there's a lot of candidates in this race and a long way to go, obviously, and folks had expected Kinloch to get in. I had been hearing his name for as far back as 2023, honestly, as somebody who might be jumping in. But he had a pretty large event at the Fox Theater, a few thousand people there. He was able to marshal, some of his massive congregation, being the leader of Triumph Church. And I think that show of kind of political force and his ability to articulate a pretty clean message about what he wants to do and differentiating himself a little bit from the candidates. It's an open race, but he's kind of rising to the top as somebody to look at.
We're going to talk about some of the other folks who have their hats in the ring right now. Of course, Mary Sheffield and Santil Jenkins, two former council people, one current council person, another former one. But one thing I found interesting in your article in Bridge Detroit that you wrote about, you said, this is a candidate who says, here's the trifecta that we have to forge here. Corporate, nonprofit, and community leaders. We have to get all those three together. It seems like when you say that, it almost sounds like a Mayor Duggan 2.0 in terms of what the mayor was able to do with those three groups.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the candidates have had a similar message, that they don't really see a future for Detroit that does not involve corporate leaders and philanthropy kind of partnering on the city's biggest issues. I think what's different with Reverend Kinloch is that he's built a lot of these relationships during the COVID pandemic, where Triumph Church really turned into like a social service organization supported by philanthropy. And so he thinks that he actually can marshal some resources that maybe have been left on the table in years past to do things like build new grocery stores, affordable housing, boost job training programs. And I don't know, we'll see if that is realistic, but it's a slightly different message that we heard. And you mentioned Duggan. Kinloch talked about Detroit being a tale of two cities, which is something you hear a lot from kind of the grassroots activist world. It hasn't been as cleanly stated by the candidates, who acknowledge that there's been, a lack of benefit for, pockets of the city as it's grown. But Kinloch is saying, look, there are people that have been really left out of the growth of the city, and that could be perceived as kind of a, a break from Duggan, who really doesn't like that narrative, doesn't see it that way.
He hates that narrative. Yeah. He sat right here and said, I don't believe that. In fact, talked to the people in the neighborhoods whose streetlights are back on. The police response time in the last 16 years has changed drastically, and now he's running for a bigger job. So he wants people to remember that. I find this interesting when you talk about ears to the ground. If one thing that the Harris camp taught us is that campaign did not fully have its ears to the ground and understand what people cared about. And because of that, there was the red wave. How do you think he's learned a lesson from that and wants to move forward?
Well, first of all, he hosted Kamala Harris at his church. Yeah. He's been, Triumph Church has been a place where Democratic leaders, both state and national, have come and leaned on him. They're doing that because he has a pretty intimate connection with his congregation. And he talked about how, part of the reason he decided to run for mayor were the conversations he was having with people in confessionals who are talking about the vulnerabilities that they face, the challenges that they're in a way that's kind of different from what you might hear at like a town hall, in a more kind of raw format. And him having that kind of trust, I think he does believe that he's got a better kind of ear for what Detroiters are going through.
There's a group that's called Detroit 1 Million. It's a publication by Sam Robinson, who part of the mainstream press, but then started his own Substack here, and Detroit 1 Million is a part of that. He is covering right now a really interesting race that continues outside of what we're talking about with Kinloch, Sheffield and Santil Jenkins, and something that happened recently that really stirred things up. Sam Robinson, take it away.
Sheffield Tuesday night was caught on video telling Santil Jenkins that she left city council at the worst of times during the city's bankruptcy in 2014. And so it's going to be interesting to see if tension between her and Kinloch is sort of captured throughout this campaign. We know that some of the city council members also are going to have things to say about their council president running for mayor.
All right, thank you, Sam, for that. We have a lot of people who have intended to put their hats in the ring, but right now, if you look at Reverend Kinloch, Mary Sheffield, and Santil Jenkins, Kinloch has an advantage here because he can look at the strife between the two of them and kind of triangulate and figure out who he wants to throw his weight behind, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for whatever reason, Jenkins and Sheffield have kind of found themselves as early rivals, right? And that tension was interesting that Sam reported on, because I think, you know, a pretty clear vulnerability that Jenkins faces is that she did leave the council during a pretty difficult time for the city to go lead the Heating and Warmth Fund and become the CEO of that nonprofit organization. And she said in the past that she did that because she wanted to serve the city in a different way. But I think there are folks that feel her abandoning, you know, the city in a tough time. She's going to have to answer for that. It's not the last time we're going to hear it. But it was interesting that Sheffield is kind of directly attacked. I mean, they were in the same room, like as close as you and I are, you know, levying this attack on her. And I think we're going to see, you know, a lot more of that. A lot of the candidates kind of see Sheffield as like the top dog that they're going to need to knock down. I was at an event for Todd Perkins, who's an attorney who jumped in the race.
That's right.
They think that they're going to have to beat her in the general. It's going to be her and some number 2 person moving forward.
Perkins, and then Joel Hashim, and now you have Reverend Kinloch. Of course, Mr. Tate, Joe Tate, kind of moved away from the focus of doing that. It's a very interesting thing. It's shaping up to be an interesting race, and one that we're going to keep watching with the help of guys like Malachi Barrett. Good to see you. Malachi Barrett with Bridge Detroit. A new layer to the illegal immigration crackdown. What people living here illegally will need to do to avoid fines, jail time, or both. That's next on The Pulse. Welcome back. A big focus of the show tonight has been politics in both Detroit and Michigan, but there's a lot happening in D.C. that we need to tell you about tonight, beginning with major news from the Department of Homeland Security, which announced anybody living in this country undocumented, illegally, will have to register with the federal government as part of the Trump administration's promise to crack down on illegal immigration. Here's what we know about it so far. It'll be mandatory for everyone 14 and older who doesn't have legal status right now. Parents or guardians of people younger than 14 must make sure that they're actually registered. They'll have to provide their fingerprints and their address. And if they don't comply, they could face fines, prison time, or both. And here's the thing. This isn't a new idea. The earliest roots can be traced back to 1942. But federal immigration law has required people living here illegally be registered. That's something we've seen before. The current requirements go back to the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. But here's the thing. Scholars say the registration requirement is rarely enforced. The Trump administration says that's going to change, but legal experts say the consequences might not matter because people living under the radar are not likely to actually do the right thing and register. Now to this, the feds are setting the stage for massive layoffs within our nation's government, and that's on top of thousands that have already been fired. Now take a look. The Offices of Management and Budget and Personnel and Budget sent this 7-page memo to the heads of executive departments and federal agencies. And in this, they say, hey, let's come up with plans to eliminate jobs and consolidate programs. Lawmakers on both sides worried about how these massive cuts will impact the people that they represent. Here's what we know about that. Agencies are required to submit their plans for what's being called a reduction in force, meaning not only will workers be laid off, but their positions will be eliminated altogether. No specific targets were mentioned, but the president did say he believes the Environmental Protection Agency could slash its workforce by 65%. Plans for how the agencies will consolidate management and possibly relocate offices to parts of the country that are less expensive than D.C. are due out April 14th. That's the deadline for that information. And then the agencies have until the end of September to put these plans right into place. Democrats and unions have tried to slow down the cuts in court. We'll have to see how this one plays out. Well, as always, we thank you so much for joining us tonight, making us your source for non-biased political news. That is The Pulse. Extra is next. I'm Roop Raj. Have a good night.